Hey everyone, this is lecture 4.1, Social Interaction. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the socialization process, statuses, roles, the difference between those things and the different kinds of statuses and roles, and then, we have some additional concepts laid on there. When we talk about the state socialization process, we must talk about the nature versus nurture debate. This is the conversation, are we the people that we are because of our genetics or because of our biology? In previous pre-scientific eras, society would talk about the way deities made us, the way God made us. Are we who we are because of how we were created? Or are we the way we are because of our lived experiences? This debate asks which factor determines individual behaviors and traits. Now, both sides of this obviously do have some very good points, and there is scientific evidence to back up either side. However, in the field of sociology, we focus primarily on the nurture element of it. And I'll just restate that again. There certainly are some psychological issues that are very much oriented in the way our body is and our body chemicals, but sociologists focus on the nurture bit. And in doing that, we are talking about the socialization process. This is a process of learning and internalizing the values, beliefs, and norms of our social group. We'll define values and norms in a few minutes. The socialization process begins in infancy and lasts through the lifetime. Language additionally facilitates socialization. We'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. Principal agents of socialization then exert major influence on us. Elements such as teachers, parents, religious institutions, peers, television, social media, could be a sports team, could be kids in your neighborhood, could be your grandparents. People that we interact with on a regular basis have a big part to play on who we become. The socialization process constructs a sense of who we are, how we think, and how we act as members of a given culture. It shapes so much of our personality. And then additionally, the socialization process is the primary way of reproducing norms and cultural values. Why does the United States today in any way resemble the United States the way it was in the 1990s or the 1950s? It certainly has changed a lot, but there are many elements that remain the same, and that sameness was created and continues to be created by the socialization process. Acquisition of language skills then coincide with the growth of mental capacities. This includes the ability of us to think for ourselves and to think of ourselves as separate and distinct elements from other people, right? And that's a moment in childhood development when the child starts to think of themselves as a separate person. It's very early. None of us really remember doing that, but we actually did it. And once then, another element on the slide I want to emphasize is we can't really tell. There isn't conclusive evidence for social scientists which happens first. Do we develop our sense of self and our expanding mental capacities? Does that happen first? Or does our capacity for language happen first? The reality of the matter is they interplay off each other. But once that process of developing of the self and language really starts to take off, you see amazing growth in the development of small children. And if any of you have witnessed the development of small children, it is, it's scientifically remarkable, if nothing else, and also lovely. Our sense of self, then, is our personal identity that is separate and different from all other people. This concept is shared with psychologists as well. We're not going to go into so much detail of the components of self, just the idea that we each have a sense that we are different than, say, our girlfriends or our fathers or our neighbor. We know that we're different people, and we take that for granted as humans, but that actually is a pretty significant element of being human that a lot of animals don't have, and little babies don't really have that either. Sociologists observe that the self is created and modified through interaction during our lifetime. And it should be noted that the scientific understanding of self has evolved over time. When we look through, we're about to look into a couple theorists in this regard, and you'll see if you look at the ideas posited by those theorists that over time the sense of what is a self does develop and evolve. So first we start with Sigmund Freud. If you know anything about psychology, you know Freud was one of those big guys. Freud is typically associated with the psychological school of psychoanalysis, but his theories and hypotheses have developed in sociology as well to help us gain a better understanding of social behavior. There are very, very few sociologists actually dedicated to like a Freudian version of sociology, but that doesn't mean that Freud didn't have some elements that he contributed to sociology in the early 20th century. Freud developed the idea of the subconscious and the unconscious mind, which he theorized control most of our drives, impulses, thoughts, and behaviors. Now, if you've ever taken a psych course, maybe you spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out the difference between the subconscious and the unconscious mind. Don't worry about that. We're not going to go into that great of detail. What Freud gives us, sociologists, is the concept that a lot of the decisions that we make, a lot of the feelings that we feel, and the processes in our brain that exist are outside of our conscious understanding. You could be still angry deep in you probably are still angry deep in your brain, or frustrated or sad about things that happened in your childhood, but you don't think about that every single day, right? That is this element of the subconscious and unconscious. And it should be pointed out that while Freud's work was greatly influential, many of his ideas have been debunked. Freud very much suffers from the element of the first guy that was in the field comes up with a bunch of stuff, and then a lot of that stuff is dismissed because it's kind of garbage as time goes on. And that is part of the scientific process. Possibly the most infamous of this is Freud's concept of penis envy, in which Freud believed, again, been completely debunked, that the reason why women are overly moody, you can hear the sexism there already, the reason why women are overly moody and don't listen to their husbands is because they secretly have penis envy, which means they secretly want to be men, and that's why it's hard, from Freud's perspective, for men to control women. Obviously totally sexist garbage, but that's an example of some of the kind of theories that Freud came up with that we've just kind of put in the dumpster behind the building. Charles Cooley then observed that one's sense of self depends on seeing ourselves reflected with the interactions of others. And his major element there is called the looking glass self. It's very important in sociology to understand what the words in a term mean. So looking glass self, that's an old-fashioned word for mirror, looking glass. It's the mirror self. It refers to the idea that the self develops through our perceptions of others' evaluations and appraisals of us. So, I act in a certain way in a classroom. I believe I am doing all of the things that a teacher does. And then, as I'm teaching, I observe, again, in a physical classroom, I observe students taking notes or looking at me or being quiet or studying or whatever, right? And then I take that information into my brain, and that tells me that I am being a teacher, everything's going well, and maybe I am a good teacher, and I start to believe that as well. That's how the looking glass self works. However, If all of my students, for one reason or another, decide to not pay attention in class or even start getting up and leaving the class, that is also an indicator to me that something's going on there. That also is a component of the looking glass self. So let's break it out one more time, super simple. I have an idea about myself. I look at other people's reactions to me, and then I put that back into my brain, and I determine, and this tells me how I feel about myself. You can obviously see how this idea can get pretty messed up when somebody has a psychological issue that does not allow them to fully process the information that they're getting from other human beings. So if you have a depressive disorder, you have an anxiety disorder, you have a social disorder such as certain variants of autism, where you can't fully take in all of the information that you're getting from the people around you, that can damage or alter your sense of who you actually are. So this idea of the looking glass self is actually super important for understanding how people feel about themselves. George Herbert Mead then expanded on Cooley's ideas. Mead observed that the self was created through social interaction, and that process started in childhood. So he took the idea of the self and the looking glass self, and he said, you know what? This idea can be very much applied to how we develop as people during our stage as being children. He broke this into 4 general stages: the preparatory phase, the play stage, and then we often break play stage into early play stage and late play stage, and then the game stage. The preparatory phase occurs somewhere in the range of 0 to 3 years old. In the preparatory phase, the child focuses mainly on playing with things by themselves often, or when they do interact with other people, it is very much oriented on them and they think about themselves. Kids that are 2 years old don't share well. You have to tell them over and over again that you have to share. It's because they don't get the idea. And basically, the way I describe preparatory phase is this is when our human brain computers are turning on, they're coming online. We are figuring out how to actually be a human being, what is food, what is not food, how do I sleep. This is all preparatory. And then play stage, age 3 to 4. And one side note right here, if you know anything about kids, these development stages are super broad. That's because a general rule in childhood development is that the age range when something is appropriate to be happening, say when a kid learns to speak for the first time, it is not as important what age it occurs as it is that it occurred and the order of operations, right? So your kid needs to go through preparatory phase. If they're through that early or a little bit late, that's okay, but they need to go through that phase and then they move on to the next phase. That's kind of a basic of a childhood development. Anyway, back to play stage then. Play stage occurs from the ages of 3 to 4, in which we take on attitudes and roles of significant others. Significant others being people who are very important to us in our lives. For little kids, that would be almost exclusively parents, siblings. It could be grandparents. It could even hypothetically be like a YouTube or a TV personality. Probably want to avoid that, but it could hypothetically be that. So in early play stage, the child plays as if they are role playing effectively. So in early play stage, you role play as my mommy or my daddy or Batman or my sister, right? Specific people. You are playing and pretending to be specific people, and then later on, in later play stage, the child pretends to be a mommy or a daddy or a sister, but a sister that is different from my sister, The difference there being it becomes more abstract, and the child starts to imagine a world in which there are different people other than just those people that they are directly interacting with. And then finally, game stage occurs from ages 5 to 6. Within game stage, children take on the roles of multiple others and become aware of societal positions and perspectives. So this is where strategic thinking comes into place for us humans. And if you want to see an amazing example of this, and it's not just sports, this could involve almost any game or strategic thought pattern. Watch kids that are 4 years old playing soccer and compare them to kids who are 6 years old playing soccer. The 4-year-olds will be running down the field, always chasing the ball all the time, because those kids do not understand basic strategy. They do not understand passing because they don't think, if I don't kick it in, nobody can kick it in, right? That's part of that lack of strategy. Additionally, certain kids will wander off and they'll start like picking dandelions or talking to somebody else on the other end of the field, completely forgetting they're playing a game, right? That is because game stage, it just doesn't make sense in their brains. But a 6-year-old, on the other hand, really can start to develop that strategy, right? Really can start thinking, okay, if I kick this ball to my teammate over there, and then that teammate can kick it into the goal, because I understand how the different roles of the different positions on the field work. That's pretty complex strategic thinking. It's that kind of thinking that allowed our ancestors to hunt animals that were much, much larger than us and much more dangerous than us relatively frail human beings, right? It's a big step in human development. But it should be pointed out that human development does not end at the end of childhood. Mead's work was intensely influential to the field of sociology and childhood development, but we kind of got hung up on it in the mid-20th century in sociology, and we failed to recognize that socialization is a lifelong process. It isn't something that just stops at the end of childhood. When we become adults, then we continue to interact with other people. And this introduces the concept of the 5th stage, the adult stage, in which we take on the role of the generalized other, we take on the role of society's norms and values, and we try to begin to understand, well, what is it like to be this other person? What would it feel like if I was poor, or if I was rich, or if I lived in Afghanistan, or if I was someone of a different political party? What would that make me feel like, right? And that is the final stage in median, if you will, Mead's sort of social theory. And it should be pointed out, many adults do not develop into this phase. That sense of empathy is, most people have it, but some adults don't. And that explains a lot of people's interactions in the world too. They simply don't understand how to really process what it's like to be someone very different from themselves. And that can be hard. We all have problems with that now and then. Additionally, then, anticipatory socialization occurs when we are seeing a big life change happening, and then we start to think through that. As college students, you went through anticipatory socialization when you went from high school to college, right? You go buy a hoodie for that school, right? And you start to think about, what would it be like to not live with my parents anymore if you're living in the dorms? What kind of food is going to be there? What does it mean to be a college student, and how will I be a college student in the classroom as opposed to a high school student in the classroom? And you learn how to do those things. That's anticipatory socialization. So, and this can occur through work, relationships, media, all that stuff could also play into there too. We try to figure it out as we go along. Slightly different idea, but very much along the same lines, is what we call Thomas' theorem, developed by W.I. Thomas. He observed that if people define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. Thus, because we encounter ambiguous, unknown situations every single day of our lives, there are many, many social meanings possible. So we humans have to be able to make assumptions about what is happening in our social world that may not necessarily be accurate. But if you had to take all the information of your senses into account at every single moment of every single day, you simply wouldn't function. You would probably be catatonic and just unable to move. So we have to decide, is this a dangerous situation? Is this a safe situation? Do I have to worry about my boss? Do I have to worry about criminals 4 miles away, right? If I define my situation as safe, I will act as if I am safe. If I define my situation as dangerous, I will act as if I'm dangerous. We see a very good application of this when we look at disasters, whether that's a terrorist event or maybe a fire or something like that. If you're in a building that is on fire, but you don't smell smoke, you don't hear alarms, you will probably sit and continue to act as if the building is not on fire, right? If you, though, are sitting in a building that is not on fire, and you're told it's on fire, you'll probably run out of the building and your heart rate will go up and you'll start to panic a little bit, right? Your sense of what is reality is very much dependent on your perceptions. So now let's talk some about statuses and roles. A status is a position in society with a set of expectations. There are different types of statuses. We have ascribed statuses, achieved statuses, and master statuses. An ascribed status is one that we're born with and is unlikely to change. This is something that is concrete, and you don't choose to do that, be that thing, you just are that thing. So your race is an ascribed status. And there are definitely complexities in each of these. But you're born white, you're born African American, that is what you're born as, and that doesn't shift. Your sex at birth is an ascribed status. Whether you're born male, female, intersex, that is a biological circumstance that occurred to you. Now, whether in your life you find that you're transgender or cisgender, that's irrelevant. What your sex was when you were born, then it plays a part into that, right? And it has an element there that will determine your social interactions through your life, regardless of what happens to you in terms of gender identity. Additionally, then, your parents' class status or maybe your parents' religion, those things that your parents chose and did that you had nothing to do with, those also shape you as a human being because of that socialization process that occurred to you in childhood, right? So those are also ascribed statuses for you. An achieved status, then, is one that is earned through individual effort or is imposed on you by others. So it's something you did or something that happened to you. Your education level. You are a college student and you did things to become college students, right? You, at the bare minimum, applied to college, right? And you probably got very good grades, and you probably also scored well on either your ACT or your SAT, whatever, you did something to get it. Or if you are in prison and a convicted felon, right? You may have committed a crime and then you got caught doing it and you're processed by the criminal justice system. Or if you're innocent, but something happened where you were framed for that crime and you're still put in prison, that is still an achieved status because it happened to you, right? And then the master status is a status that seems to override all others and affects other statuses that we possess. This is the status that is the one that comes up the most frequently. It is the one that gets in the way of us maybe doing our other statuses. And when you think about that even a little bit, then you can come to recognize that your master status, if you as a person are going to be discriminated against, each of us probably is aware of what is that thing that I could be discriminated against for. If something comes to your mind immediately, that means that's probably your master status, right? So women, black people, potentially LGBTQ plus people, those individuals, there's their master status right there. Now, if you're a cisgender heterosexual white guy like me, it can be harder to think of your master status because, well, I'm not going to be discriminated against. Now, given I could be discriminated against for certain things, but I don't have a really super tight master status, and that is the result of privilege, and that is an element of privilege. We'll talk about privilege later in the course. Roles, then, are behaviors and expectations tied to a particular status. So you have statuses, and each status has roles. Each status has multiple roles. So I am a teacher and I grade papers. I am also a father, father being status, role for that status being I care for children. Now, in regard to our roles, we have two types of behavior, role conflict and role strain. So you're probably going to spend a little bit of effort trying to figure out the difference between role conflict and role strain. I try to be as clear about these as possible because they can be confusing. So role conflict occurs when the roles associated with one status clash with roles associated with a different status. So, for example, a sick child makes it hard for me as a teacher to grade papers, right? My role as a father is to take care of children. My role as a teacher is to grade papers. So the role from one status is getting in the way of the role from another status, and the statuses wind up fighting with each other in a conflict. That's role conflict. Should it be called status conflict? Yes, but that's not what it's called. It's called role conflict. Role strain then occurs when roles associated with a single status get in the way with each other. So as a parent feeds children, and then so that's one role, but children also want to be played with sometimes, and if children want to be played with when you're trying to make dinner, then that child being played with and child who needs fed, those roles get in the way of each other, and they strain the social structure that is the status, right? So I think of strain in terms of a bridge with a lot of weight on it. That kind of strain. That's a visual that works for me. Now, either role conflict or role strain, if it becomes bad enough, could lead to role exit. It could lead to you choosing, you know what, I can't be a teacher anymore. I am just going to be a parent from now on. I'm going to quit that job. That would be role conflict. Role strain, you know what, I have too much grading to do. I have too many classes and I just can't take it anymore. I'm burnt out. That's role strain. That causes me to role exit, and then maybe I find another job, or maybe I go live in the woods somewhere. Now we have a few additional concepts related to this lecture. Agents of socialization are the social groups and individuals that provide structured situations where socialization occurs. Our major agents of socialization are family, which is often called the primary agent of socialization, schools, and schools often have components in them with what is called the hidden curriculum. That's laid out in your textbook. You can check that out a little bit more detail. Don't really have time for that right now. Peers, when we become adolescents, our friends become very, very important socializing agents. We learn how to drink and do drugs from our peers, right? We learn what is sexuality, what is my sexuality. We learn that from peers. Yeah, we might have a cool relationship with our parents, but you can't learn everything from your parents. That's where peers come in to adolescence. And then mass media. And that applies primarily to one-way channels of media, not really social media. So it would apply to things like YouTube, doesn't really apply as much to things like Instagram or Facebook, etc. And there are many agents of socialization. Resocialization, then, is the process of replacing previously learned norms and values with new ones as part of a transition in life. So when you were a high school student, there were certain expectations of you. Now that you're a college student, there are different expectations from you, for you. And as you moved from high school student to college student, you had to be resocialized. And yes, anticipatory socialization is part of the resocialization process. Now, sometimes some people enter into total institutions, which is an institution that tries to take control of your entire being or entire entity, at least for a short period of time, but often for long periods of time. So prison is a total institution, a cult is a total institution, a mental hospital is a total institution. They try to control all elements of your life entirely so that they can do something. And it could be something that's beneficial to you. If you're put into a mental institution for a short period of time, you might just be put in a quiet room where you can be basically let to calm down for a week or so because you don't need outside stimuli. That's for your own good, but that is also interaction with the total institution. Emotion work then refers to the process of evoking, suppressing, or managing feelings to create a public display of emotion. This is it's tied with our jobs, right? So examples of emotion workers could be service industry jobs. If you've ever worked retail, if you've ever worked in fast food or any restaurant, you know you can't just tell the customer to go screw off, right? You can't do that, no matter how terrible they're being. That is you doing emotion work. Funeral workers, similarly, the funeral home owner or whatever, they can't be super duper happy all the time when they're doing their job, especially when a client's there, right? They have to act very somber every single day of their life. That's emotion work. A psychologist trying to help you out and work through your individual problems can't just say, oh, come on, this isn't a big deal at all, right? That's a degree of emotion work. And then sociologists also have spent a great deal of time studying sex workers, because in that extreme situation in which people are selling sexual favors for money, or we think of it as an extreme situation, and what happens there and how they control or suppress or pretend to be aroused or whatever they have to do there, that also is a form of emotion work. And this is the last slide for this presentation. Sociologists, additionally, we are interested in the concept of copresence. This is when individuals are in one another's physical or social presence. And that's a slight typo there. It doesn't have to be physical presence anymore. One of the major ways that you and your life experience is different from that of your grandparents is that you can be in co-presence with friends who are thousands of miles away. You can be in co-presence with your parents, etc., through internet communications technologies. And I have taught for universities all over the country, right? I have taught students who are in Turkey. I have taught for students who were in active war zones in Afghanistan. That is all elements, that's co-presence, right? That's being in the same social place, even though you're not in the same physical place. It's a very interesting concept there too. Okay, this one was a little bit long, but that's good. It was important information. If you have any questions, as always, please just let me know and I can clarify. Okay, thanks a lot.